Jesus went to heaven, and he was looking for his Father, because he had to ask Gabriel, and Gabriel didn't know where he was, and finally Jesus, wasn't sure where to look, but he noticed that there's this misty area, and so he went over there, and he saw this old man walking through the misty area, and he was kind of bent over a little bit, and walking, he had kind of long white hair, and finally he came up to Jesus, and Jesus said, "Well, what are you doing?" And he said, the old man said, I'm looking for my son." And Jesus said, "Well, how would you know your son?" And he said, "Well, I would know him by the holes in his hands from the nails." And Jesus looked at him and he said, "Father!" And the old man looked at Jesus and said, "Pinocchio?" Now, in the context of total irreverence, in fact, I think on my tombstone I'll have him put Irreverent Steve Towles instead of Reverend Steve Towles, because I've really made my life kind of walking on that edge a little bit. But in the context of irreverence, which I think is important for us, because laughter and kind of looking at the other side is important, we find what we think we often don't find what we think we are looking for. That what we actually find is something different in our life experience. And often we operate from this premise that, and it's I think Wayne Dyer talked about the memes that we have, the sort of the messages that we have. And one of our cultural messages is that happiness and fulfillment are somehow tied to our financial well-being. Do you ever have that meme sort of go through your head, is that I will be happy when I have this, that, and the other thing, or I have this job that gives this much money, and so on and so forth. That's sort of a meme that we have in a cultural sense, and so it's tied to that. And yet oftentimes you talk with people, especially people who are doing well in their life, and talk about when the happiest times of their life were. And they will often, in a lot of nostalgia, kind of look back at the times when they most were struggling to build their life, when they were newly married, or they didn't have much and they were living in a cheap apartment, or they'll often look at that time in their life and say, that's the happiest, and one of the happiest times of my life. And I remember, I think it was Yogi Berra that said that youth is wasted on the young. Well, that's easy to say from a certain perspective, okay? Because what happens is we look back at those times, and we look back at them through the eyes of knowing what's going to happen. You see, when we're in the middle of those moments, we don't know what the outcome's going to be. We don't know, what steps to take. We don't know any of this. And so we often are caught in where we are in that moment. But when we are on this end of the spectrum, we look back and we know. We know what's going to happen. We know what took place. We know what brought us to this point. And so it's much easier to look back with a sense of nostalgia. And I think that that's what makes the spiritual life so compelling, is that when we are clear about spiritual principles and spiritual law, when we have a real clear sense of what that is and what it's about, then we can look forward. You see, this is the difference. We can look forward and know the outcome of our life experience because we know what our thoughts, words, and actions are in this moment. And we know that our thoughts, words, and actions are what are creating what is coming in front of us. And so when we stand firm and we are clear about the spiritual principles of our life, then our nostalgia can be directed towards the good that is coming to us because we are demonstrating that in our thoughts, words, and actions and in our life experience. The good and bad that shows up in our life are most generally not random events. They're not things that just show up out of the blue, that we somehow have drawn those things to us. They're the results of the weeds or seeds that we've planted in our life experience as we move through it. Often, most of them unconscious, or we're not aware of them, or we're not clear about what it is that we're doing or creating. Now, right now, we're in the third chapter of a book that I'm using called The Power of Giving. And in The Power of Giving, This week's lesson is sort of centered around focusing on choosing to whom it is that we are to give. To whom it is that we are to give whatever good we are. Now, the absolute truth is that we are all givers. The absolute truth is that there's not a person in this room that is not giving all the time in their life. You know, we talk about givers and non-givers. Well, the truth is we're all givers. We're all giving something out into the world all the time. We're giving something to ourselves. And the quality of our giving is related to the choices that we make and the consciousness out of which we give. Now, it's interesting that the answer to the question, to whom do we give, I think in the context of our spiritual work, is we give what it is that we have to give, and what we need to give is to ourselves, so that what we are giving to others comes from what we have accepted in our own consciousness. So the first place that we need to give is to ourselves. Now that may sound a little narcissistic or self-centered, but it's not. Because if we are building the consciousness out of which we give, then the most important thing we can do is give to ourselves what it is that we wish to give to others. Do you see that idea? It doesn't take, I was looking for some examples, and you don't have to look very far in the newspaper to find lots of negative examples about the process of giving. And there was this article, I think it was Friday's paper, about this young lady who had put some deposit money down on a rental house, and it turned out that the guy that she was renting it from put the advertisement on Craigslist, but it wasn't his house. And so he was scamming, basically, and he had collected like $3,000 in deposit money on this same house, and so she managed to turn him in. She managed to set it up so he got caught. But she was not very happy. She was pretty angry, pretty frustrated. She had a lot of good reasons to be, because there was a lot of energy tied up in what this house was going to represent for her and for her kids. That's what the story was about, was all of the feelings that she was experiencing. And so, what do you suppose the scammer gave? You see, he gave something. So the scammer gave deception and heartache. That's what he gave to this situation, to this experience. And so you must know that somewhere in his consciousness there has been a lot of deception and heartache that has occurred in his life, because that's what was in him to give in this moment. Now what do you suppose that his victims are giving? They're giving anger, frustration, hurt, revenge, all those kinds of thoughts that show up in the context of having that kind of experience. And so they're all giving something to each other, in a sense, and to other people. So the question is who is the swindler and who's being swindled? Where does that process show up when you begin to step back and look at this in the context of our life experience and what it is that we want to see and experience? Who are the victims really angry at? I know that if it happened to me, certainly I would be angry. So we're not talking about not being angry. We're not talking about not feeling frustrated or any of those things, because those are important acknowledgments of an experience that we are all having in a certain situation. Certainly I would feel that. But the question is when we are able to step back and acknowledge what it is that we are feeling and experiencing, and then decide what it is that we want to give to the situation. Do you see the distinction? That if we are awake enough that we can step back and say, okay, I'm feeling this and I'm experiencing this. This is what I received from this situation or this person or what's going on. But the question is, what do I want to give back?